The morning of my brother's wedding, I was already dressed and in my car before I let myself cry. I had told myself I wouldn't. I'd made that promise in the bathroom mirror at 6 a.m., mascara wand in hand, while the spring light came sideways through the frosted glass. You are not going to fall apart today. You are going to walk in there, and you are going to be present for this. Whatever happens. But sitting in the driveway of the rental I'd been staying at for the past 3 weeks, because I no longer had a home to go back to? Not really. I let myself have 2 minutes. Just 2. Then I drove. My brother Elliot was getting married at a vineyard outside Niagara-on-the-Lake, the kind of place that costs more per head than most people spend on rent in a month. The invitation had come late. Not late like the mail was slow. Late like it was sent 6 days before the event, with a note from his fiancée, Adrian, that said simply, "We wanted to keep the guest list intimate. We hope you understand." I understood perfectly. I just didn't agree. Our grandmother had passed 11 weeks earlier. She died in the house she'd lived in for 43 years. The house our grandfather built by hand outside of Hamilton, the house where Elliot and I had spent every summer of our childhood catching fireflies and eating corn on the cob on the back porch until our faces were slick with butter. She had died on a Tuesday morning in February, and I had found out through a text from a cousin because no one in my immediate family had called me. Not my brother. Not my father. Not Adrian, who by that point had been living in my grandmother's house for 2 years. That's what people don't understand when I try to explain this. They hear stepmother drama or jealous sister-in-law, and they picture something petty. A fight over a holiday dinner, some passive-aggressive comment at Thanksgiving. They don't understand how something can be dismantled so slowly, so methodically, that by the time you realize what's happened, the walls are already gone, and you're standing in a field wondering where the house went. Adrian had moved into my grandmother's life the way a vine grows over a trellis. Quietly, organically, helpful at first. She drove her to appointments, picked up prescriptions, called every Sunday. My grandmother was 81 and had arthritis so bad in her hands she couldn't open a jar anymore. And here was this warm, attentive woman who had appeared in her grandson's life and wanted nothing more than to take care of her. I was doing my CPA designation at the time. I was in Vancouver for a practicum placement. I called my grandmother every week, sometimes twice, but I was not there. That was the reality Adrian built her case around. It happened in increments. My calls started going to voicemail. Texts took days to come back, and when they did, they were shorter than my grandmother had ever been with me in my life. A woman who once wrote me a 4-page letter about why she preferred geraniums to impatiens. The messages started to feel like they were being composed by someone else. "I'm very tired, dear. Adrian keeps me busy. Give me some time. I flew back for Christmas in 2023, and Adrian met me at the door. Not Elliot, not my grandmother. Adrian, smiling, telling me that my grandmother had already gone to bed, that the trip had tired her, that maybe I should come back in the morning." I stood on the porch of the house I had eaten 1,000 meals in and thought, something is wrong, but I didn't have the words for it yet. I didn't have the proof. I came back the next morning. My grandmother held my hands across the kitchen table and looked at me with something I didn't recognize at the time. It took me months to understand what it was. She was asking me something without being able to ask me. She was trying to tell me something she didn't have the freedom to say out loud. Adrian made breakfast. She refilled the coffee before anyone asked. She laughed at the right moments and touched my grandmother's shoulder with a gentleness that looked like love. I went back to Vancouver 2 days later, and I didn't know that would be the last real conversation I would ever have with her. By spring of the following year, Elliot had stopped returning my calls about her care. When I asked direct questions, is she eating? Is her doctor concerned about the leg swelling? Has anyone reviewed her medications? I got big reassurances. She's fine, Petra. Adrian is handling it. You worry too much. I want to say I fought harder. I want to say I fought harder. I want to say I flew back, demanded to see her, made noise. But I was also 29 years old, 1,000 kilometers away, working 70-hour weeks, And every time I raised a concern, I was made to feel like the difficult one, the paranoid one, the one who couldn't just trust that her family was being taken care of. That's the thing about being slowly erased from someone's life. You start to doubt your own perception of events. You start to think maybe you're imagining the distance. Maybe you were never as close as you thought. Maybe you're the problem. She died on a Tuesday. I found out on a Wednesday through a cousin's text that read, "So sorry for your loss, I assume you know. Thinking of you, I didn't know." I had not known. My brother had not called me. I drove to the airport in a state I can only describe as static. Like the channel had been cut, but the television was still on, just hissing. I bought a last-minute ticket to Toronto for $940 that I absolutely could not afford, and I arrived at the house on Thursday morning to find that the funeral arrangements had already been made. The obituary had been drafted. My name was in it, listed as a surviving grandchild, fourth down the list. Below Adrian, who was listed as a devoted companion, the will reading was scheduled for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, I was told by Elliot, very gently, very carefully, that the house and its contents were being handled by him and Adrian, and that I should get a hotel because the spare rooms were being used for out-of-town guests. My grandmother's house had 2 spare rooms were being used for out-of-town guests. I knew that house better than I knew most of the people in my life. I had helped her paint the hallway in 2016. I had fixed the screen door latch twice. I had helped her sort through 40 years of photographs on a rainy October weekend 3 years ago, and she had pressed my hands in hers at the kitchen table and said, "Everything I have comes to you both equally, you know that, don't you?" I said yes. I had believed her. The will was not what she had told me it would be. It had been amended 14 months prior. The house, a century home on 2 acres that the Niagara Region assessor had valued at $1.1 million, was left to Elliot outright. The contents, furniture, artwork, her jewelry collection, were left to Elliot and Adrian jointly. I received the TFSA account, which held $18,400. There was a note attached to my portion, in a font I did not recognize, in phrasing I did not recognize, that said my grandmother had wanted to ensure I had something to start my independent life with. My grandmother had never in her life used the phrase independent life in that context. She would sooner have said your own future or something to fall back on. The phrasing was wrong in a way I couldn't explain to anyone except myself, which meant I couldn't explain it at all. I sat in the office of the estate lawyer, and I looked at the document and I thought about those calls that had gone to voicemail, those short texts, that look across the kitchen table. I took photos of every page before I left. I want to be clear about something. I am an accountant. I work with financial documents professionally. I know how paper trails work. I know what legitimate amendments look like, and I know what pressure campaigns look like dressed up in legal language. And the more I looked at the timeline, the more I kept returning to one detail. The will amendment had been signed 14 months ago, during a period when my grandmother had been on a new combination of medications for her blood pressure and her pain management. A combination that her GP had flagged in a follow-up note as causing, in her words, notable cognitive fluctuation and increased susceptibility to suggestion. That note was in the medical file I requested through her estate. It had been made 6 weeks before the will amendment was signed. I hired a lawyer, not a big firm, because I couldn't afford one, a sole practitioner in Hamilton who specialized in estate disputes and who had a direct, unhurried manner and charged a flat rate for the initial consultation. She listened to everything I said without interrupting, and then she looked at me and said, "This is worth pursuing, but it will take time." I said I had time. I had nothing but time. What I also had, which I had not yet told anyone about, was access to my grandmother's email account. She had given me the password 2 years earlier when she'd wanted help sorting out a confusing message from her bank. I had never used it for anything except that one afternoon, but it was still in my phone, saved in the password manager I'd set up for her. And when I opened it the night after the will reading, sitting in my rental car in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons on the QEW, I found 14 months of correspondence that told a story I already knew but could not yet prove. I didn't sleep that night. I made a folder. I made a document. I noted every email, every date, every inconsistency. There was an email from Adrian to the estate lawyer dated 6 days before the will amendment appointment, which said only, "We'll be bringing her in Friday at 2. Please have the draft ready as discussed." My grandmother's name was not mentioned. She was referred to throughout as she. There was an email sent from my grandmother's account to me, dated 8 months ago, that I had never received. It was in the sent folder. It said, "Petra, I have been thinking a lot lately. I am not sure everything is as it should be. I would like to talk to you privately. Please call me on Tuesdays when Adrian is at her yoga class, around 10 in the morning." I had never gotten that email. It had been sent to a slight misspelling of my address, one transposed letter, a typo that anyone could make, except that my grandmother had emailed me for years and had my address saved in her contacts, and somehow this one time the address had been manually retyped. That was the moment I understood exactly what had happened. And I understood that I was going to have to be patient. My lawyer filed a request for a capacity assessment review tied to the will amendment. The process was slow. Everything about the legal system in Ontario is slow when you have no money and the other side has a house worth over $1 million. But we had the medical records, we had the emails, we had a forensic document examiner who looked at the will amendment and found that the signature, while not definitively forged, showed markers consistent with guided signing, meaning someone holding or steadying the hand of the signer. My grandmother had severe arthritis. It was not impossible that she would have needed assistance, but it was also not what a freely given, independently executed signature looks like. Elliot called me twice during this period. The first time was to ask me to let it go. He said it in a kind voice, which almost made it worse. He said our grandmother had simply changed her mind, that she had grown closer to Adrian, that I had been absent and he had been present, and these things have consequences. He said he was sorry if I felt hurt, but that fighting this would only damage the family further. I asked him if he'd read the email from her account, the Tuesday morning one. There was a pause. Then he said he didn't know what I was talking about. The second call was from a number I didn't recognize, and when I answered it was Adrian. She told me, in a voice that was smooth and controlled, that she was willing to offer me an additional $30,000 as a gesture of goodwill if I dropped the legal proceedings. She said my grandmother had loved me very much, and she was sure she'd wanted me to be comfortable. She said this was the kind of offer that didn't come twice. I told her I would think about it. I did not think about it. I forwarded the recording to my lawyer. I had been recording every call since the will reading. In Ontario, you are permitted to record conversations you are a participant in. The wedding was at 3 o'clock. I arrived at 2:30. The vineyard was the kind of beautiful that feels aggressive, rolling and green and golden, the lake glinting in the distance, the kind of outdoor setting that makes everything look cinematic, whether you want it to or not. There were white chairs arranged in rows on the grass. There were flowers I didn't know the names of. There were people I recognized from childhood and people I had never seen before, and somewhere in the middle of all of it was my brother, in a suit that fit him perfectly, looking like the kind of person things work out for. He saw me from across the lawn. I watched his face move through several expressions in under 2 seconds. I walked toward him and I said, quietly, so no one around us could hear, "I'm not here to make a scene. I'm here because she was my grandmother too, and I have as much right to be here as anyone." He said, through a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "Petra, today is not the day." I said, "I know. That's why I'm not saying anything. I'm just standing here." Adrian found me 20 minutes later, near the bar. She was in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and she looked at me with an expression I can only describe as proprietary, the look of someone surveying something they own. She said, "I think you should leave." I said, "I was invited." She said, quieter, leaning slightly forward, "You're going to embarrass yourself. There's nothing here for you. Walk away while you still can." I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about my grandmother at the kitchen table in December. I thought about that email sitting in the sent folder, typed to an address one letter off from mine. I thought about a woman I had loved my whole life in a house that smelled like wood polish and old books, asking me something with her eyes that she couldn't say out loud. I said, "I'll stay for the ceremony." She gave me one more look, the kind that's meant to communicate that you have badly miscalculated, and walked away. The ceremony was 22 minutes long. I stood in the back. What happened at the reception was not something I planned for that venue or that day. My lawyer had been communicating with the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit and the Ontario Public Guardian and Trustee's Office for 6 weeks. She had the forensic report. She had the emails. She had the recorded phone call with the settlement offer, which constituted an acknowledgement of the dispute and an attempt to resolve it outside of court, and which, in context, looked very much like someone who knew exactly what they had done. The timing was not my choice, it was the court's. I was standing near the edge of the reception tent when I saw the two officers arrive. They spoke to the venue manager. They were quiet and efficient in the way that people who do difficult things professionally tend to be. They had paperwork. They asked for Adrienne by name. She was at the head table. She was mid-laugh at something someone had said. She looked up, and she saw them, and I watched her understand what was happening in real time. I watched the laugh leap her face like weather. She was not arrested at the table. She was asked politely and quietly to step aside. She walked with them because she didn't have a choice, but she walked the way people walk when they are trying to look like they chose to. My brother stood up and followed. I watched from across the room. What was confirmed in the following weeks? The will amendment had been executed during a period where my grandmother lacked testamentary capacity under Ontario law. The guided signature evidence, combined with the medical records and the email correspondence, was sufficient to have the amendment set aside. The estate reverted to the original will, which split everything equally between Elliot and me. There was also a fraud charge. The settlement offer recorded on my phone, combined with the email directing the lawyer to prepare documents prior to the appointment, was enough for the Financial Crimes Unit to pursue. I am not a lawyer and I won't speculate on outcomes. What I know is that the process is ongoing. The house sold 7 months later. The proceeds were divided equally. I did not want to live in it. Too much had happened there in those last 2 years, and some things you cannot rinse out of the walls. But I sat in the empty kitchen one afternoon before the sale closed, at the table where my grandmother had held my hands, and I let myself stay for a long time. There is a version of this story where I talk about how it feels to win, to beat them, to watch justice arrive in a cream-colored suit at a vineyard wedding and get escorted out by people with badges. And I won't pretend there wasn't a moment. A brief and honest moment where that felt like something. But mostly what I felt, in that kitchen, was the particular grief of things that happened too slowly to stop. My grandmother had tried to reach me. She had composed that email on whatever Tuesday morning she'd had 20 minutes alone and typed out my address and pressed send. 1 letter off. I think about that a lot. Whether it was exhaustion or trembling hands or something she caught too late after a moment of hesitation, I will never know. What I know is she tried. My brother and I have not spoken since the settlement. I don't know what he knew and when he knew it, and I'm not sure I want to. There's a version of him I grew up with, catching fireflies and running through that backyard, and I'm choosing, for now, to leave that version intact. I drove home on the 4-3 in October, the maples doing their full blazing thing along the highway, red and gold and unreasonably beautiful the way Ontario gets in fall. The settlement check was in an envelope in my bag. Not enough to fix everything. Enough to matter. My grandmother used to say that the people who take from others always believe they deserve what they're taking. That's what makes them so hard to see coming. They're not ashamed. They're convinced. I thought about that a lot in the months I was building the case. Every time I doubted myself. Every time I thought maybe I was the difficult one, the paranoid one, the one who couldn't just let it go. I knew her. I knew her handwriting and her phrasing, and the way she laughed at her own jokes before the punchline. I knew the address she typed into emails 100 times without thinking. I knew something was wrong before I had a single piece of paper to prove it. And I held on to that. The simple, private, Completely unverifiable knowledge that I had known her and she had known me until the paper caught up. I merged onto the 401 heading east. The sky was the particular shade of late afternoon that makes everything look briefly, painfully resolved. I turned the radio up and drove. I think about the email a lot. The one my grandmother sent to an address, one letter off from mine, on some Tuesday morning when she had 20 minutes alone. She typed it out, pressed send, and believed it had reached me. It never did. And for a long time, that detail felt like the cruelest part of the whole thing. Not the fraud, not the will, not the $30,000 phone call. Just that small, quiet effort that went nowhere. But I've come to see it differently. She did the right thing, even isolated, even medicated, even surrounded by people who were slowly rewriting her reality. She knew something was wrong, and she tried to say so. That clarity, that insistence on her own perception, even when everything around her was designed to make her doubted, was a kind of integrity I'm still trying to live up to. What happened to her happened because someone calculated that I wouldn't look closely enough, that I'd be too far away, too busy, too worn down by the slow drip of being made to feel like the difficult one. And honestly, they nearly had it right. There were months where I almost let it go, where I told myself it wasn't worth the cost, the time, the legal fees I couldn't afford, the family I was already losing. Adrian bet on that exhaustion. She offered me $30,000 and called it goodwill because she thought I'd take the money and go quietly. She miscalculated one thing. I knew my grandmother, not in a sentimental, general way. In a specific, particular way, her phrasing, her handwriting, the address she typed into emails 100 times. I knew what her words looked like when she chose them freely. And when the will amendment didn't sound like her, I didn't dismiss that. I held on to it even when I had nothing else to hold on to. That's what I want to say to anyone who's been in a situation like this. Your knowledge of the people you love is not nothing. It is not paranoia. It is not nostalgia distorting your judgment. Sometimes it is the most accurate instrument you have, and the hardest part is trusting it when everyone around you is telling you to let it go. The proof came eventually. It came through medical records and forensic analysis, and emails pulled from an account I almost didn't think to check. But the proof was always chasing something I already knew in my gut. And if I hadn't trusted that gut long enough to start looking, the proof never would have found anything to confirm. I'm not interested in pretending this story has a clean ending. The money helped. Justice, such as it was, happened. But my grandmother is still gone. My brother and I still haven't spoken. The house sold to a family I'll never meet, and whatever was left of those summers is now someone else's walls. What I carry forward is simpler than any of that. Do the right thing even when it costs you. Stay sharp enough to notice when something is wrong, and don't stop when the work gets hard and the outcome is uncertain. Because the people who count on you staying in the fight are often the ones who can no longer fight for themselves. My grandmother tried to reach me on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't there in time. But eventually, I showed up.